Thank you. I'd like to turn your attention now to education, which I believe is relevant in preparing the country to compete in the future. Mostly, the initiatives in this sector included raising the salaries of teachers. But what is not mentioned in the policy work is that these increases favor only those in the public school system. In fact, the private education system has suffered unintended consequences involving mainly the migration of teachers from the private to the public sector. This is an added strain on the private schools, and it imperils the jobs of hundreds and thousands of teachers, administrators, and other employees. They have been reminding lawmakers and policymakers that the 1987 Constitution recognizes the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system, according to Article 14, Section 4, Subsection 1. My question is, as President, how will you execute the constitutional provision on complementarity in education so that we have a stronger educational system built on a true-to-form public-private partnership?
And the first candidate to answer that question would be Secretary Abella, then we'll have Calyodi, Secretary Gonzales, and Senator Marcos.
I'm familiar with the problem because we run a secondary school. And that's true that, many of them just leave. Now, offhand, what do you do? But basically, I think what we could do is if we could provide, for example, certain, if government could actually provide private schools with additional benefits and leeways in terms of support, not necessarily direct rollouts, but actually, for example, holidays, tax rebates, rebates along that line. But definitely, it's something that needs to be attended to, and it's something that has to be responded to as soon as possible, and basically, it should be considered as a top priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Abella. Calyodi, same question.
Mas talaga ang dapat gawin ay mas magbigay talaga yung gobyerno ng mas mataas na atensyon dito sa sektor ng edukasyon. At dapat hawag niyang buong-buo na talagang ipinagpapaubaya doon sa private that nagre-resulta ito ng madaming problema para doon sa ating mga mag-aaral. Turing natin na importanteng sektor ito na yung edukasyon at yung responsibilidad talaga ng gobyerno natin itaas to the maximum na akuin niya yung responsibilidad na tiyakin na yung sektor ng edukasyon natin ay nabibigyan ng prioridad at natutugunan yung pangangailangan ng tamang curriculum na nakaayon doon sa programa sa pagbangon ng ating ekonomiya. Hindi dapat mahiwalay at itulak yung private na tugunan din para mag-complement para sa kanilang plano.
Secretary Gonzales.
Pinaka-importante ang edukasyon. Lalo na kung nag-aambisyon tayo maging first world. Dapat ipibigay natin sa ating kabataan ang pinakamahusay na edukasyon na makukuha natin sa mundo. Yan ay dapat na ipatupad ng ating pamahalaan. Ngayon, may isang malungkot na bagay lang na dapat tayong i-correct. Alam nyo, hati ang lipunan natin sa mayaman at mahirap. Ito ay malinaw na malinaw sa sistema ng edukasyon natin sa Pilipinas. May edukasyong pangmayaman, may edukasyong pangmahirap. Sinasabi natin, pag eskwelahan ng mahirap, okay na yan, pangmahirap lamang. Hindi papayagan ng ating pamahalaan ng bagay na yan. There will be a common standard for all. We need our young people to receive the same kind of education whether you are rich or you are poor, which means na i-implement natin yung nasa konstitusyon. Ito bubuhos ng gobyerno, pribado, publiko, ang pagtataas ng antas ng quality ng ating edukasyon na nakatutugma sa pangangailangan ng ating mga kabataan sa kasalukuyan. Dapat, mabadali na lang ngayon yan. Mag-relate tayo sa iba't ibang universidad, sa iba't ibang panig ng daigdig. Dali natin dito ang magagandang edukasyon para sa ating kabataan.
Thank you, Secretary Gonzales. Senator Marcos.
Maganda at napunta ang usapan natin sa larangan ng edukasyon dahil sa aking pananaw ay ang edukasyon ang pinakamahalagang serbisyo na idinudulot ng pamahalaan sa kanyang mamamayan. Kaya't ang dapat unang gawin ay siyempre yung public school system ang unang dapat titignan. Patitibayin natin. At saan natin pagagandahin? Paano natin pagagandahin? Unang-una, suportahan natin ang ating mga guro na yung sapat ang kanilang hindi late yung kanilang sahod na dumadating. Unang-una, laging reklamo yan ng mga teacher natin. Pangalawa, lahat ng benepisyo na nasa batas ay maibigay natin sa kanila nang sa ganun, hindi nila kailangang isipin kung paano nila papakainin ang kanilang sariling pamilya at ang iniisip lamang nila kung paano sila magtuturo para pagandahin ang magiging kinabukasan ng ating mga kabataan. And sa bukod pa doon ay yung mga facilities. Kailangan yung silid-aralan ay paramihin natin, yung mga supplies na binibigay natin sa ating mga public school ay paramihin natin, pagandahin natin lahat ng mga materyales na ginagamit at sa ganung paraan ay ang mga teacher natin kailangan natin suportahan hindi lamang sa financial na suporta kung hindi sa pag-aaral, sa pag-refresher course para sila ay talagang tinuturo nila ang pinakabago at ang pinakatama na dapat turuan sa mga bata ngayon.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. I think Secretary Abella has a reaction.
Gusto ko lang po dagdagan na, for example, kasi ang pinag-uusapan po natin dito yung support to private schools, right? Kung pwede magbigay ng paluwal ang gobyerno, lalo na sa mga private schools, lalo na pag sila mag-i-specialize sa science, technology, and the sciences and the sciences. So kung pwede po sana natin bigyan silang paluwal, suporta paggawa ng mga laboratory, suporta paggawa ng mga research ng mga teachers, mga guro. And then, meron meron ding kontrata, some sort of covenant na ano may makuha doon should be shared, no? Should be shared. Basically, it should be dapat na share. For example, research, science, ganon. Dapat na share sa business so that it becomes part of the public treasury of knowledge. So kumbaga, para yung tinatawag natin na complementarity ay dapat matutugunan lalo na by supporting private schools, especially those na talagang pumupunta sa science, ini-emphasize nila ang science.
Thank you, Secretary Abella.
Thank you.
Mr. Ang has a follow-up question.
Yes, Secretary. I think one of the existing programs now is the voucher system, given directly to students,
Correct.
allowing them to choose whether they enroll in a public school or a private school. The problem, however, is that some say that the voucher system does not go far enough, and even the amounts of the vouchers themselves require public schools to charge a top-up fee just to meet their cost if they are to offer the available programs that they have. So would you, as President, look into that as a possible solution so that there will be competition, a healthy competition between public and private schools on quality and let the students choose?
I would do that. I would do that, especially katulad doon sa, pero tama kayo, yung voucher system kulang talaga yon, no? Kulang talaga siya. Kung pwede dagdagan. On the other hand, basta't pwede naman taasan yung pinamimigay, basta't lang yung resulta, no? Magiging resulta should be made publicly available so that nagiging kasama sa ating public treasury of knowledge. Yun po.
Yes. May I?
Senator Marcos?
Yes.
Senator Marcos.
Sa palagay ko, kahit anong voucher system ang gawin natin, magiging laging kulang yan. Kaya sinasabi ko, unahin natin ang ating public school system. Ngayon, paramihin natin ang ibinibigay ng pamahalaan na scholarship para yung mga deserving, yung mga napakasipag at napakatalino at napakatalented ay mabigyan ng pagkakataon na makapunta sa kahit anong eskwela. Hindi lamang dito sa Pilipinas, marami tayong scholarship programs na nanggagaling sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. At sa ganung paraan din, maaari nating i-encourage. Sabihin natin, kailangan natin ng agronomist. Di gumawa tayo ng scholar para maglabas tayo ng maraming scholarship fund para sa mga agronomist. Gusto natin na paramihin ng ating engineer. Ganun din. Kaya siguro, yan ang maaari nating magawa para bigyan ng pagkakataon ang nanggaling sa public school na makapag-aral sa mamahalin na private school.
Thank you,
Senator, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the study commissioned by COCOPEA. This is the Coordinating Council of Private Education Associations of the Philippines. They did commission a study around 2020 where the results were the returns on investment by private schools resulted in higher returns than the investments in the private educational system. So in a sense, there's private capital being invested for a public good. And yet, the private school system is saying that they are not given an even playing field because all of these initiatives, although well met, somehow have these unintended consequences that work against the private educational sector's economic interest.
Well, the very nature of a public school as opposed to a private school is different. And as you say, the private capital is being expended to run that private school. And therefore, the decisions on how they run that school depends on the management of that school. Now, the public school is something we have control over. And that is why I think that we should focus our efforts first in the public school system. And the private schools will again find maybe if they need that, if that is what they need additional capital because it is not only an educational institution, but it is also a business. And therefore, they have to make those decisions themselves. Now, if we improve the quality of the teaching in our public schools and the support that we give our teachers, then I think we can even out that playing field that you're talking about.
Any reactions from our candidates?
Follow up.
Okay. Mr. Ang has a follow-up question.
Just the other day, one of our columnists, Father Rani Aquino, came out with a column warning against a measure in the Congress, House Bill 10282, which basically makes the Commission on Higher Education a very domineering institution in an environment where the private schools already feel that there's policy overreach and overregulation. They feel that this atmosphere stifles innovation in education, and because they are getting higher returns on their investments, it seems like it would be a wrong move to further empower these educational institutions to continue these domineering policy work over the education system. Would you have a comment?
Well, I don't think that is not a systemic problem. That is a policy problem. And that is how we should address it. The system is not at fault here. It is the policy that's being undertaken that causes this dysfunction that Father Rani has been talking about.
Any other reactions from the other candidates with regard to that question?
It is a policy matter, not a structural problem.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll move on to our next question from our panelists.
Can I follow through Dante's question?
Okay, before we leave that topic, sure,
Yeah,
Professor
because-
Carlos.
Yeah, before you call on MJ. Well, I'm an educator, and I have been teaching for the past 55 years. You know, I started teaching when I was 20, so I'm 75 now. So education is really so pivotal to my professional life. The empirical evidence suggests to us that effective learning happens on the basis of two factors. First, the mastery of the subject matter by the teacher, and two, a fairly high level of motivation by the student, and they are interacting. Therefore, if you want to do any policy changes, that means you pay attention and you invest on the teacher. Do not invest on air-conditioned rooms, classrooms, etc., because these things can happen even under the papaya tree. But if the teacher is bobo, no learning happens. So that means if you have limited number of pesos, put it on the training of teachers. Okay, the other part, and I was triggered by the question of Dante here, is yes, a legislation which is going through the legislative mill in regard to empowering the CHED. Why in heaven's name did we divide our education system into a DepEd, K-12, a CHED, and kung bobo ka, diyan ka na lang sa VOCTEC, ha? No? I remember, ang uncle ko sabi niya dun sa isang bobo kong pinsan, ay nako kasi mahina naman ulo mo, mag-teacher ka na lang kaya o mag-military. Oh my God! yung bobo yung gagawing teacher, no? So, education is so pivotal to the life of our nation. So, you as chief executives, I would plead that you pay attention to empirical evidence. The critical variable for effective learning to happen is to invest on the teacher. Thank you.
Yes.
So is there a question that you want them to address? Or
Well, Karen, I'm really leading to what Dante said. You need an EDCOM too. Kasi yung EDCOM 1 ang nagganyan yan nag-divide yan sa tatlo. Why they divided that? I don't know. There's something so brainless about this division.
Well, Karen, if I may add, recently, referring to another editorial I wrote, there's some conflicting studies on the level of interest of learners in sciences and mathematics, in STEM. And of course, this is contradicted by the DOST study saying otherwise. But the original study by PIDS was saying that the normal approaches, such as giving scholarships, may not be enough to interest young learners into going into STEM. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on maybe addressing that particular issue.
In particular, we're thinking of developing what we call a National Volunteer Corps, which would be equivalent to the Peace Corps, where we would challenge our young people between ages 18 and 35 to devote actually at least 2 years of their lives before they go full force into whatever they want to do, to volunteer. And what would they do? They would become part of community building, teaching especially students in the rural areas, those who would be in public schools. And they would be emphasizing at least 3 things. Number 1, mastery of reading, writing, and arithmetic, so that and if possible, in the mother tongue before they do it in English. I would strongly recommend that public schools and schools should begin with mother tongue and then in English, because that is how they understand the concepts. That's one. All right. Well, the other one is if this National Volunteer Corps could actually help become models of what it truly means to become a person of integrity. Thank you.